Hello, everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As always, I like to remind everybody, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Spotify. So today, I'm going to do something that no libertarian has ever done. I'm going to talk about the First Amendment. I know, I'm kidding. Obviously, I know I am neither the first nor the last libertarian to ever talk about the First Amendment. But this is kind of an idea I've been kicking around a little bit. Doing various episodes here and there, focusing on specific constitutional amendments and kind of giving my ideas on them and discussing them, especially as they relate to current events. And so, obviously, where else to start but the First Amendment, especially right now, given everything that's going on. So, just for the sake of doing it, not that I don't think any of you know what the First Amendment says, but let's just go ahead and read the First Amendment just so we can start there. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peacefully to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And that's it. So clean, so elegant, so simple, but so incredibly important. And I know we're not supposed to play favorites and we're supposed to love all of our amendments equally, but I gotta say, the First Amendment's my favorite one. Because first of all, just the concept that this is the First Amendment, like of all the amendments that we have, I mean, all the ones that were included in the original Constitution, this was the one that they decided should be the First Amendment. This is the one that they considered the most important. And it's really interesting when you stop and think about it, that they did put actually establishment of religion and the exercise of religion ahead of everything else first and foremost, because you have to understand the first people that came to America were doing it to flee religious persecution. So that does kind of nod to our past of how exactly people got here in the first place. And then, of course, the ones that we all love the most, the freedom of speech, of the press, of people to freely associate with people, and to protest your government in a peaceful fashion. All of these things are obviously very, very important to a free democratic society, but we live in a very unique country where these things are actually codified into law, into our Constitution, that Congress cannot make any laws regarding these topics. That is so really unique in the world today, and it's very, very special, and it's very precious, and we are very lucky to have the First Amendment and to have these freedoms, because so many other countries do not have these freedoms. And you're starting to see, especially over in the EU, other Asian countries, Australia, where you have the government coming in and trying to make laws regarding these things. And this is just an issue that, because of the First Amendment, because of the Constitution, because these things were written down, that we are never going to have these conversations and have these issues. And as an offshoot from the First Amendment, it also gives rise to our culture of free speech in this country, because the attitude's always been that basically because Congress can make no law abridging speech or religion or of the press or to peacefully assemble or to protest your government, that neither can anybody else. And that's another thing that's really unique about this country, is that we do have this very robust society where, even though current circumstances aside, I do think that most people believe in the concept of free speech and to be able to freely express yourself. And I know that's a bit under attack lately. I know I've discussed it plenty. I'm sure I'll discuss it plenty in the future. But it's the concept that because this is the society we live in, these are the people that founded our society, and the reasons why America even exists in the first place is that, yes, we do need this culture of free speech. We do need to have the ability to speak freely and to associate freely. Especially when you look at countries where obviously this hasn't always been the case. Obviously, some countries have been more totalitarian about this than others, but yes, there have been and are currently today countries where if you don't have something like the First Amendment codified into law, then you can be prosecuted for speaking your mind. You can be prosecuted for protesting the government. You can be prosecuted for practicing religion A instead of religion B. So I'm sure everybody listening to this probably doesn't, but I think we're kind of getting to a point in our society where some people are beginning to take all that for granted and not stopping and thinking about what it would be like if we did not have First Amendment protections. And this whole idea that some people have straight up said that the First Amendment needs to be abolished, which you get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. Do not ever touch the First Amendment. I will come find you. I will fight you. But even people that want to tinker around the edges and say, well, but we need this over here and this over there because this person might be offended, or this thing might not be factually correct, or we might have, I don't know, people doing hate speech, whatever the hell you want to define that as. And that's, to me, that's a big no-no. Do not do anything that abridges anybody's First Amendment rights. Ever, ever, ever. No, that is sacrosanct. Do not ever, ever advocate for touching any of that. No, don't do that. And to that point, and kind of one last point I want to make before we move on, is I have in past episodes, and I want to go ahead and reiterate it here. There is a difference between a First Amendment issue and a free speech issue. First Amendment issues deal solely with laws being passed that could curtail any of your First Amendment rights. Free speech issues are a lot more murky and a lot more nebulous because they don't involve kind of that cut and dried, Congress shall make no law. Obviously, it's very specific as to what Congress can and cannot do in that sphere. But outside of Congress, outside of the federal government, you have other entities where obviously they're not constrained by the First Amendment per se because they're not Congress, but they do run afoul of our society's kind of our what we like as far as free speech is concerned. And I know this has been a big, big deal lately, especially with everything going on social media, everything going on college campuses, everything like that. And we're going to discuss that in a little bit. But I did just want to go ahead and draw that line again, that sometimes people use First Amendment and free speech interchangeably, and they're really not. They're related issues, but they are two very separate, distinct things that do need to be discussed kind of separately from each other. So moving on back over to our wonderful social media internet conundrum that we have right now. I know I talked about it a lot last week because last week they had the tech hearings again where Jack was there, Sandberg was there from Facebook. And I said it last week, but I think it bears repeating. And that is, as far as I'm concerned, I do not understand or support anybody of any political stripe who goes to Congress and advocates for Congress to do something about speech on social media. No. My answer to that is go fuck yourself. Do not ask the federal government to have anything to do with this. It is not their business. It is not their concern. They have no business getting into the free speech debate. Please stop fucking asking them to do so. It is not their place. And I don't understand why people who advocate for that don't understand how badly that can go wrong. I don't get you. What do you not understand that one day the people that you don't like, or more importantly, don't like you, are going to have those powers and they're going to use them against you. It's not always going to be in your favor. So don't give anybody any power to do something to somebody else that you would not want them to do to you. Because when you advocate for doing that, that's exactly what you're doing. Republicans aren't going to be in Congress for forever. You're not going to have a Republican president for forever. Eventually, one day, Democrats will take control again, more than likely, assuming that both parties don't blow themselves up in the next 10 years, which is a likely possibility. But At some point, the people you don't like are going to be in charge. And they're going to use the powers that you advocated for them to have. And then you're just going to be sitting there looking like a fucking idiot. And I'm going to sit there and be like, I told you so. And on top of that, getting the federal government involved and having them do something in the way of, I guess, making a law. Although, again, First Amendment, ding, ding, ding. That would take what is currently a free speech issue and turn it into a 1A issue. Which that is not going to withstand any kind of court challenge because we've already gone over that. Congress shall make no law regarding speech. Can't abridge it. Can't do anything about it. So I don't understand why. Why do we keep having people ask them to do this? Why do we keep having these hearings? Like, you literally have no legal standing to do anything about this. So it's just such a fucking waste of time. It's like, stop it. You have no business being here. You have no business saying anything about what anybody does on the internet or what anybody says on social media or who is on it and who's not on it and who got kicked off and who gets left on and blah, 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 blah. Because you can't do anything about it. So just stop wasting everybody's time. Stop petitioning Congress and wasting their time. Stop letting Congress do these stupid fucking hearings and waste everybody's time. And just accept that this is not going to happen. Now, moving on to the protests. Basically, campus protests, what I want to talk about. Because it always seems to be focused around this idea of who gets to say what and when and where and who gets invited and who gets disinvited and blah, 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 blah. What always strikes me as so funny about these protests, not that there's a lot to laugh about, but this is basically people using their First Amendment rights. They're using their First Amendment rights to, well, not always peacefully assemble, but to at least freely associate, to be able to speak, to protest other people's rights to do the same thing. Like, you're protesting, you're using free speech, you're using the First Amendment to protest the First Amendment. Like, don't you understand how stupid that is? I don't, like, kind of, there's a part of me, and I've got some thoughts on this upcoming. I don't really want to touch on it here because it's kind of beyond the scope of what I want to talk about, but it strikes me as just so funny that, like, these protesters don't seem to understand that concept. It's like the thing that you're protesting, if it didn't exist, you wouldn't have the right to protest. So maybe take a step back and kind of think this one through and be like, you know what? If I would not want to be silenced, if I would not want to be told that I don't have a voice, if I would not want some kind of rule instituted against me about what I can say and who I can associate with, maybe let me not do that to other people. But obviously, no, that's not where we're at. But again, maybe that's changing. I don't know. Maybe it's overblown. It's, again, those are conversations that are kind of beyond the scope of what I want to talk about today. But moving on to another situation that's going on that I don't know how many people really know about this because it's kind of not something that's been widely, like, discussed or promoted in the U.S., but over in Myanmar, Asian country, 2 Reuters reporters have been jailed for, quote-unquote, publishing state secrets, which obviously anybody who is familiar with U.S. law, and especially, again, the First Amendment, freedom of the press, knows that this is something that we do also hold sacred in this country, and that's the fact that you have to let the press report what they're going to report. Like, you can't, as a state, you can't suppress what the press reports. Like, the press does serve a function. I know they've not been the best at it lately. There's plenty to say about that. But that freedom does serve a very important function, and that is in order to check the government and to check society at large when things are starting to go a little wrong. Like, you have to have the freedom to say, hey, shit's fucked up, and not be thrown into jail for it. And you have to have the freedom to report stories, to take facts that you get from various sources, sometimes on the record, sometimes off the record. Sometimes you get slipped information that is very volatile, very explosive. Sometimes you get slipped information that could, quote unquote, cause a national security concern, which that's a whole nother ball of wax. But you have the right, as a member of the press in this country, to do that, to bring these stories to the American people, to show them this is what is going on. And what's happened in Myanmar is basically, obviously, jailed the reporters, international backlash. Obviously, everybody has come out against this, and now they're basically like, whatever, fuck you, we did it, what are you going to do about it? And so, obviously, I'm sure there will be more backlash about that. This is still an evolving situation. I hope maybe at some point these people get released from jail, because obviously you should not be in jail for reporting a story. Straight up. No matter what Obama would like to tell you, everybody seems to have forgotten that. Like, especially in the whole atmosphere of every time Trump tweets something about changing the libel laws or doing something about the press or this, that, and the other, it's like, okay, yeah, it's a shitty thing to say, but whatever, it's a fucking tweet. He's not actually prosecuting members of the press for reporting stories, which is what Obama did. He tried to get journalists to give up their anonymous sources, which you don't do that. Like, even as every journalist knows, you don't burn your sources. And every president, or at least everybody in government, especially if the president happens to be a quote-unquote constitutional lawyer, should know you don't fucking do that. You cannot prosecute members of the press for reporting a story, especially if the story is correct. It's right there in the First Amendment. Like, this is a no-brainer. But to bring it back to the Myanmar situation, like I said, I hope there's enough international pressure put on them to release the reporters. And yeah, it's just another one of those things that I think a lot of people take for granted in this country, that the press does have that First Amendment protection. And it is important. Like I said, even though the press does a somewhat shitty job lately of doing their job, it's important that they exist. Like, they do have a function. They're kind of failing at it right now, but they do have an important function. And there are some journalists out there who are doing fantastic work. And it's all because the First Amendment allows them that protection to go after stories and break stories that may not necessarily make the government very happy, but at least they don't have to worry about being thrown in jail or worse over it. So next up, I want to discuss what's going on in the EU right now. And I want to go ahead and start. I know we've probably discussed this ad infinitum, but it's just such a perfect case example of what's going on over there. And that's the Count Dankula case, which I'm sure all of you know this. I'm sure all of you have followed it. And luckily, we're on the backside of it. He's not in jail. He managed to beat the case. Hallelujah. But it's still, the point stands that the EU government wanted to throw a man in prison for the high crime of making a really stupid prank video. Which, if somehow you're not aware, basically what he did was, he was a YouTube personality, somewhat famous before all this blew up, and now obviously he's super fucking famous. But what he did was, his girlfriend had just gotten a pug. And she was going on and on about the pug, how cute it is, how sweet it is, because, it's a small pug. Who doesn't fucking love pugs? So he decided that, what is, like, the worst thing that I can teach this dog to do? And I want to point that out. It's like, that was the whole point of this, was like, he thought of what is the worst thing? Like, what is the ugliest, most vile thing that I can teach this dog to do to make it not be cute? And it was to Sig Heil. Which, I mean, it's, first of all, pugs are adorable. Pugs are not the smartest breed in the world. So it's not like you can be like, the pug is a Nazi now. Like, it's a fucking dog. It's not a Nazi. It doesn't know anything about that. But so what he did was, he trained it to whenever he would talk to the dog and he would be like, "You want to gas the Jews?" He would put one paw up like a Sig Heil. And so he put it on YouTube, and it's funny. Like, it's obviously like the dog has no idea what the fuck it's doing. But somebody flagged it as hate speech, and they actually took him to court for this. Like, it was an actual court case. And he had to go to court to defend himself against making a stupid YouTube video about teaching your dog how to lift his paw when you say this one thing. Like, that's just so fucking dumb to me. It's so ridiculous. And I often wonder, like I said, we're through it now. He's not in jail, but I wonder if he was not as popular a person as he is, if this case didn't garner as much attention as it did, as if he didn't get as many donations as he did to pay for legal counsel. Like, would he be sitting in a jail cell right now over making a stupid YouTube video? Like, seriously? Like, he could be in prison right now because you made a prank video to piss off your girlfriend. Like, that's just... I'm still not over it. Like, that's just so insane to me. But what else is kind of going on in the EU right now is they're proposing a new copyright law. And now this is still in the proposal stage. I think there's still supposed to be a final vote on it in the spring. And I'll post a link in the show notes to an article that kind of breaks it down a little more than what I'm going to do. But the main problem would be for like end users like us is this idea that basically anybody, not just end users, but even like Google and stuff like that, would have to pay. Like, whenever you like use a clip from an article, like if you just like quote clip it like you do sometimes when you make a tweet or you're doing something like that, that you would have to pay the person who wrote the piece or whoever published the piece, probably. Obviously, that would be a big, massive deal. And the second part is, if you use somebody's photo and they found out, you would have to owe them, you'd have to pay them for the right to use their photo. Which this is why it's the whole joke about the EU trying to outlaw memes. This is where that comes from. So basically, if you use somebody else's picture and like you memeified it and you put it out there in the world and that person found out, they could come to you and be like, hey, you got to pay me $500 or you got to take this down. So you can see where this would cause a massive, massive problem. Because if you can't just like quote tweet things or you can't make memes, obviously, this is going to have a big impact on the ability to speak freely and to have free speech in the EU. Because if you have to pay to like link to somebody's stuff, like, you're not going to do it. Which is funny because there's two countries that have tried to do this already, Germany and Spain. And basically, they went after Google for doing it. Because if you've ever looked at Google News, you'll see like there's the link. And then, like, underneath that, there's a little snippet of text kind of telling you what the story's about. So they started trying to go after Google for using those little snippets and saying, hey, you got to pay for that. So basically what Google did was they're like, LOL, fuck you. We just ain't going to run your shit anymore. And I'm sure I don't have to explain to anybody here or anybody who makes content what happens if Google decides they're not going to index or promote your content anymore. Your chances of somebody seeing it are going to go significantly down, which is exactly what happened to these companies who tried to come at Google for this. So it didn't really fly in those two countries for that very reason, because basically publishers were like, oh my God, this is just insanely impacting us, so let's maybe not do this. But it's just an example of, first of all, I mean, I guess you just have to keep throwing the dumbass idea at the wall until it sticks, and then eventually you figure out, oh, this was a dumbass idea. But second of all, it does, again, these are the kinds of things that we don't have to worry about in this country because we have the First Amendment. So it's something that you can't really take for granted, especially right now when you see what's going on in other countries who don't have these kind of protections for their citizens. And just the havoc that could be caused over stupid shit, over nothing, because you don't have First Amendment protections. Alright, so moving on from the EU down to Australia. I saw come down my Twitter timeline this morning There's a case in Australia right now where there's a little girl, well, I call her little, she looks like she's probably be like elementary school age, who has gotten into a bit of trouble because she refused to stand up for the national anthem in her classroom. I guess it's much like we do the Pledge of Allegiance here, like you stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance, you stand up there for the national anthem. And she decided that she did not wish to stand up for the national anthem because she felt that it was disrespectful to Indigenous people. Which, setting aside all the woke kid stuff, it should be her right to stand up or sit down for whatever song that she feels like standing up or sitting down for. Like, it shouldn't be compulsory to stand up for the national anthem. But, again, because they do not have the First Amendment rights that we have here. And, by the way, this is something that's already been decided in the U.S. Like, yes, children have the legal right to not stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance because of the First Amendment. So anybody who wants to make that argument that kids should stand up, go fuck yourself. It's already been legally decided. Your opinion means diddly squat here. But it's this idea that she has to, and they want to like kick her out of school for this. Like, you want to kick a small child out of school. You want to deprive her of getting an education because she didn't stand up for the Skycloth song? Like, honestly, like that's, I mean, I've got my problems with state-run education, don't get me wrong, but, I mean, you don't kick a child out of school for that. Like, that's insane. Like, but again, this is the culture that we live in versus the culture that exists in other countries, where, obviously, we understand these things because, yes, children do have constitutional rights too, but it's this environment in other countries where, like, if you don't stand up for the song, you can be deprived of an education. Like, that's fucked up. Like, why does anybody care if you stand up for the damn national anthem or not? But that was just one that just came down my timeline today. And it made me think about the First Amendment too, because obviously, like I said, this has already been codified in the US. You don't have to stand up for the national anthem. But obviously, in Australia, they haven't quite figured that one out yet. So I hope everything works out for the little girl. I hope she doesn't get kicked out of school over this, because, I mean, she's a child. Like, she deserves an education. And, again, setting aside all the thoughts about state-run schools and all that stuff, like, you don't kick kids out of school for not standing up for a song. Come on, man. Like, stop it. Okay, but the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up for today is, I call it the libertarian misconception about the First Amendment. And it's not that I think libertarians have a misconception about it. I think people outside of the movement have a misconception of how we view the First Amendment. Which is to say, there seems to be this idea that just because libertarians support the First Amendment and support free speech, that somehow by doing that, you are like blanket co-signing everybody everywhere at any time. Which, no. That's not how this works at all. And I say that it's people outside of the libertarian movement, because like I said, obviously everybody inside figures this out, but it's one of the biggest smears that's used against us. It's like, oh, well, you just support hate speech, and you support Nazis, and you support blah, blah, blah. Like, no, I support their right to speak, but, and especially you see this, and I don't think I've ever discussed it on the podcast before, but kind of the libertarian alt-right pipeline that everybody likes to talk about. I think that's how these people get in the pipeline, is they see libertarians, they see us being defenders of the First Amendment, they see us being defenders of free speech, and they think that, oh, I'm going to go join those people because they will support me. Which, no, we won't. I mean, we'll support your right to go say whatever the hell you want, even if it's disgusting, vile, nasty shit. But if you think for a second any of us are going to co-sign you, you're wrong. Just go ahead, skip over us. We're not the group you think we are. We're not the group for you. Just go straight to the alt-right, whatever the fuck they're doing now. I don't even know. They're a mess. But I think that's how that kind of pipeline happens, is they kind of start, I guess, as Republicans, and then move over to libertarianism because my freedoms, but Just because we support your freedoms doesn't mean we co-sign your bullshit. And as soon as they figure that out, they move on. So that's how I think that happens. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't really understand. And especially people looking at it from the outside in, and that whole argument like, oh, well, the libertarians attract alt-righters. It's like, yeah, they show up and then they leave when they realize they're not really welcome. And to kind of touch back to the other point is this idea that people will look at it and see like, okay, you're a libertarian, you support free speech, you support the First Amendment, you support hate speech, you support Nazis and racist and awful fucking people, which, no, we don't. We actually don't really like anybody who engages in identity politics because it's not what we're about. So it's just that weird smear that we just, it crops up every so often. It's like herpes. It's like it'll be gone for months and months and months, and then one day it's just like a total flare-up of like 10 people making this argument. It's like, where the fuck did y'all come from? Like, we've already discussed this. Stop. But yeah, that's the misconception that I kind of wanted to go ahead and end this with. So if you've made it this far, as always, thank you. And if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Spotify. Take care, and until next time.